Good evening, everyone. My name's John Highbush, and I have the honor of being the Executive Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, and I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. In honor of our men and women who defend our freedom in their uniforms, if you would please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. A couple of weeks ago, I found myself interviewing a candidate for a job that we're about to fill here, and the person I was interviewing asked me a great question, and she said, "What's your favorite part of the job?" And I didn't have to think very long before I answered. I told her that it was the chance I often get to welcome the very special people that we have the opportunity to meet here as they take this stage. Now, if you see a big smile on my face at any time tonight, it's because I have the opportunity to introduce someone that is not only world famous for what she's done and what she does every day, but is also a friend. At least that's the way I like to think of her. So as a friend, let me give you a little bit of inside information on Dana Perino before we hear from her about her new book and maybe even some juicy Washington or New York gossip. Okay, so first, she is supremely talented at what she does, and what she does, she succeeds in just about any endeavor she might so choose. She broke a huge glass ceiling when she became the first Republican woman to serve as White House press secretary for 7 years under President George W. Bush. And now she appears as a co-host on The Five at Fox, where she proves every day that she is a world-class expert on the world of politics. She is truly an effective communicator who finds a way to talk often about very complex issues in a simple way so that even amateurs like myself can understand what's going on. Ah, you say, that is not inside information at all. Everyone knows that about Dana. Well, did you know that the first book she ever wrote, and the good news is, rocketed to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list? I see a few of you were here at her last book signing, so some of you know that. Well, did you know that Dana used to be a country music DJ, and from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. in Pueblo, Colorado, she used to routinely play Billy Ray Cyrus's Achy Breaky Heart. Okay, well, there's a couple back there from Pueblo I met, so there's a few here that knew that. Did you know that there are still some copies of Dana's newest book on sale at our store, and that she would be happy to autograph 1 or 101 for you after our event this evening? Hopefully everyone knows that. Did you know that rather than give a tired, worn out, and boring speech from this lectern, Dana has agreed to sit with me for an exciting interview about her new book, Let Me Tell You About Jasper. Whether you knew that or not, that's how we're going to do it. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming to the Reagan Library world-famous American political commentator and author, Dana Perino.
You are my friend.
Well, let me first say, I picked up Dana's book, and I put my thumb in the middle, and I found from the center of the book on back are the funniest photographs I think I've ever seen in my career. It is just absolutely terrific, and I just wondered what gave you that idea, Dana. How did that whole thing come about?
Well, I am glad that your first question is an easy one. I expect them to get harder as the evening goes on. It's a joy to be back here with all of you, and to be back here with this book, which really is quite remarkable given that it's about a dog. The first book I ever wrote, I was in second grade. I loved books as a kid, and I wanted to be an author. And I found this book not too long ago when I was moving some things around, and in a trunk, it's got a cloth cover on it, and then inside, remember that paper that had the blue lines? Okay, the big, where you could learn to write. And it's called If I Were. And the first chapter is If I Were a Dog. And it's got illustrations that are terrible. And I guess I always wanted to do an illustrated book about a dog. I didn't know that this would ever be possible, but because of the way that my life has turned out, the way that the Republican Party supported me, and that George W. Bush trusted me to be his press secretary, and now I have a chance to be on Fox News on a show where we have a lot of fun and a lot of good discussions on the five, and the election coverage has been amazing. But this book was actually born out of the first book. So for those of you that might have tried to write a book at one point, there's these things called editors, and they'll kind of rain on your parade sometimes. So the first book I wrote, I'm not a natural long-form writer. I could write a press statement like nobody's business, but long form was harder for me. But I wanted to write that book for a couple of reasons. I felt the story of the Bush administration had not been fully told, or at least not from a perspective from somebody who worked closely with him. And I also really felt that it was important for me to give back in terms of the mentoring advice that I could give to all young people, but in particular younger women, to let them know that there was a way to succeed, and there's a way to conduct yourself with dignity and grace in today's work environment, which might not always feel like that's possible. So I write this book, I turn it in, and my editor writes back, he's like, okay, almost every page said more, need more, okay? So it was a little bit too dry, and it wasn't as personal as he was hoping, right? Because he's like, you tell these stories with such emotion in person, you need to bring that to the page. So I work all summer, from June to August. Everybody else got to go to the pool. I sat with Jasper on the porch swing, writing and writing and writing. I turn it in August, and he comes back to me 3 days later, and he said, I am so sorry. It's too long. And you'll need to cut 10,000 words. So for those of you that read, and the good news is, I hope you might agree, it's pretty tightly written. I mean, I didn't know how to cut 10,000 words out of it. And I struggled for a weekend. And I went back and I looked, in the dog chapter was 9,500 words. And it broke my heart. Because I love this chapter about how dogs have been a part of my life since growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, and I'd had family pets, and that my dog had really helped me through the White House years and had made my marriage stronger, and they just bring you so much joy, and I'd found a way to reach common ground with people from all different walks of life because of dogs. And I went to the editor, Sean Desmond, and I said, you can have the dog chapter. Now, he's not a dog person. So he was like, yes. But as he takes it from me, he said, I promise you that one day there will be a dog book. So let me tell you about Jasper. The illustrations that you're talking about come from the only good part of Twitter. Do you remember in 2012 when Mitt Romney was about to have his convention, and there was all this talk of a mystery speaker? And nobody knew who the mystery speaker was going to be. So that night on the 5, we did a segment talking about who we thought should be the mystery speaker. And of course, Gutfeld, you know Gutfeld, he says, I'm sure you're going to say Jasper. And And I said, oh, actually, I was. About an hour later, I look on Twitter, and there's this picture that is actually in this book of Jasper at the podium at the Republican National Committee with a sign from Greg for Speaker and Dana for Majority Leader. And I just was so tickled by it. A couple weeks later, we were talking about something else. All of a sudden, this picture shows up, a picture that I had posted of Jasper, but now he's in some sort of different scenario. And this happens over a while. And I just laughed so hard by an anonymous guy named 5fan Photoshop. I connected with him on direct message, and we established a friendship over a couple of years. And when the first book was successful, then your editor will come back and say, we'd like you to do a second, unless you're as good an author as John, who already has a second book in the works and hasn't even had his first one published. But it's coming out March 14th, and we'll all be back here to talk about it. And I asked 5fan Photoshop, I said, that chapter is not long enough for a book. And I can add some things, but what would make this book special? What would make it unique? Because a lot of people have done books about dogs. In fact, I get people sending me the self-published books that they've done about their own dogs, because he's called America's dog, not because I think he's the #1 dog in America, but because one night on Red Eye, years ago, Gutfeld said, would you be upset if the paparazzi were taking pictures of Jasper? Like this Hollywood starlet was upset. I said, no, of course not. I want to share my dog with everyone. He can be America's dog. So we went to the editor and I said, what if we take a collaboration of all of these photographs, this collection of Photoshops done by 5fan, and put it together in a book? And they said yes. And here we are with this book.
Yeah, that's great.
I just want to show, let me give you an example. There's one here that's not connected. I don't know how that happened. That was like magic. Here's an example. I think that maybe you can see. This is Jasper as part of Mount Rushmore. Megyn Kelly, one night on her show, when my book came out, she surprised me and said, my son takes this book to bed every night because he loves to get up in the morning and look at the pictures. And he makes up stories about the pictures of Jasper. So I didn't know that it would be something, I hoped it would be something that children would like, but I didn't know it would be as good as it is.
Yeah, it is terrific, just terrific. Okay, so you have to tell us, where did your love of dogs start out?
So the book is dedicated to my grandfather, Leo E. Perino. He was a rancher in Newcastle, Wyoming, a Republican county commissioner. I dedicate it to him and thank him for teaching me about dignity, patriotism, and love for animals. So on a ranch, as humans, we have dominion over animals. And on a ranch, you are dependent on the livelihood of your animals in order to sustain your own livelihood, right? So you need them to be well so that you can be well, and it's a wonderful circle of life. And my grandfather was insistent that we never, ever let any creature suffer. In fact, I'm reminded of something that happened with a cat. This just came to mind. So my cousin Wade, if you're watching anywhere, apologize for calling you out here, but when we were little kids, I remember one Christmas, it was freezing cold, like well below 0. And so we had additional chores that week because the animals had to be taken care of. And the calves needed to be fed. If the mother cow had abandoned them, you have to feed the baby calves. So the calves were being fed by us in these big bottles. I could still smell that milk formula you put together. The big nipple on the bottle, give the calves. And then there was always a little left over. And what my grandfather would ask is that we'd take the big cast iron skillets that were down at the barn and that you put the leftover warm milk in the skillet for the cats. And there's all sorts of cats. Well, then you have to go back in the afternoon, right before sunset, and do it again. Well, we get down there one night, and I'm the oldest grandchild. Wade's not too far behind me, but they lived on the ranch. We sort of lived in Denver area. So we would come up, and I always took a back seat to whatever they were doing. Well, we get down there, and a little kitten has crawled into the skillet. And it was warm, right? And he had sat in there, and it froze around him. And only his little head was sticking out. And my cousin picked up the skillet and started swinging around like this and saying, woo, woo, woo. Well, my grandfather was coming around the corner. and he saw this. Let's just say Wade got in a lot of trouble. And my grandfather used dogs in his work. And he could train a dog to do anything. He could look at a dog, and they would know, oh, I have to go get the mares now and bring them around the corner and put them in the corral. He had certain whistles, a snap, and these dogs were so loyal to him. And they also, they were outdoor dogs. There's one dog at the ranch. His name was Mo. He was a little tiny poodle, and he got to have his hair done and everything. And my grandmother doted on this little house dog. And every time he went to town to get groomed, when he came back, the first thing he did was find the biggest pile of manure to go in and ruin it all so that he could have his street cred back with the other dogs. So I grew up really with a fondness for my grandfather, and of course, he passed he passed the day after Thanksgiving in 2001, right before I went to the White House. And I always wish that he would have known, because let me tell you, he loved Ronald Reagan so much. So he would be really proud today.
That's great. You mentioned loyalty of dogs, and I wanted to just see if you feel the same way. I've had dogs in my life, and then you talk to others that have had dogs, and they oftentimes say that there's something about the loyalty of a dog that you never can ever quite reach in a human being. There's just almost just like 100% loyalty. It's like a love. And I wondered if you agreed, if you have felt that way or seen that.
Well, I think the relationship with your dog is a lot less complicated than relationships with people. And it's a pure love, and it always goes both ways. It doesn't matter how draining my day was at the White House. I remember one day, Peter picked me up, and I had a bad day. I can't even remember what it was about now, but at the time, it seemed like the end of the world. And I'd been fighting, I think, with some reporters. I was mad about what was going to happen the next day in the New York Times. That actually was a daily basis, but I caught a glimpse. Peter picked me up, and Henry was in the back seat, and I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'd become so hard-edged and angry. And the one thing that could definitely turn me around just like that was Henry, because he liked to get up in the front and lick my face. And Peter would ask me, how was your day? And I would always say, why don't you tell me about Henry's day first? The other thing is, this part of the proceeds of this book will go to Companions for Heroes. And that is a group that connects rescue dogs with wounded warriors. And I have seen it work, because the guy who started it, Dave Sharp, was a brave patriot who served right after 9/11, came back with post-traumatic stress, and his friends kind of didn't want to be around him that much because there was volatile anger, and they were never sure of his mood. And one of his friends said, I think you should get a dog. And he was like, I don't need a dog. But he went to the shelter. His friend took him to the shelter. He got a dog named Cheyenne, and he fell in love. And this was a dog that he could tell anything to. And there was not going to be any judgment or any worry. But on a particularly bad night for Dave, he said he was contemplating suicide, and that he was about to do that when he looked down and saw Cheyenne looking at him. And he said, I can't do that to her. And from there, he started his recovery, and now he started Companions for Heroes, and I've been honored to work with him, because they really do make it possible to get back out into the world. Like, if you have a dog, you got to walk it. And so we go to the park, and I meet people, and I've also found that there's no partisanship when it comes to dogs. You can get along with just about everybody. America can't agree on much, but your love for your pet, that's respected.
Tell us about Jasper, his breed, and the characteristics of the breed, and what is it that you like about that?
So when I first got married, we were almost married. I was living with him. I know that was wrong. I don't know why I could be so honest. Though I did move to England. We were planning to get married. We were about to get married. And we both wanted a dog. And he wanted a chocolate lab or a black lab, and I really was fond of a Weimaraner. And we weren't in a big hurry to get a dog, so we just have a little wait. We had some travels to do. And on that trip to Europe, where we had to go visit one of Peter's clients, we met up with Heiner in Switzerland. And now remember, I'm coming off a job on Capitol Hill where I was a spokesperson for the chairman of the Energy Committee. Now I can't work because I'm living in England. I don't have a visa. And Peter needs to have this meeting. So Heiner says, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you come up to the house? We'll have our meeting, and Dana can play with the dogs. And I thought, wow, I used to be somebody. But to my great enjoyment, there were 2 Vizslas there, a 7-year-old and a 3-month-old puppy. And they had just lost their 14-year-old. And I had a Weimaraner looks very similar to Jasper, a Vizsla. They're of the same sporting group and hunting dogs. And I said, what in the world is this? And he told us all about the breed. They were really bred by the Magyar kings in the 11th century. And one of the things that they really wanted was very loyal dogs. So they were bred to believe that it's okay to get on your furniture and to sleep on top of you in the bed. And like, I literally wrote, if Jasper were here and I was sitting like this, I would have to get over as far as I could. And he will get up here and he'll find a way to turn around. He's 62 pounds and quite lean and tall. And then he'll sit here just like a person, sit here and look around. And I had to type like this because he'd put his head on my lap. And that's how we wrote most of this book and the other one too. So they're very affectionate. This one, my previous Vizsla was Henry. He was so smart. Oh, I should tell you his political tricks. He could do all sorts of tricks. And I taught him, in 1998, I taught him to bark on the word jail. And during the Lewinsky hearings up on Capitol Hill, if we had friends over, I could just say, Henry, do you think Bill Clinton should be in jail? And he would bark. And people thought that was so amazing. I mean, I didn't think Bill Clinton should be in jail, but it was for fun. So then, a few years later, I would ask Henry, tell us what you really think about John Kerry. And John Kerry was a trigger word, and he would go get my flip-flop and bring it back. And George Bush loved that story. He said, tell me that again, Henry. And then because Henry lasted through 3 administrations, so then we have Obamacare. And I would say, Henry, what do you think of Obamacare? He would play dead. And it turns out he was right. Henry had foresight. Along comes this one, Jasper. On the very first day that I had him, I bring him home. I realized this dog feels every emotion more than any other dog I've ever known. So if he's happy, it is exuberance. If he's scared, it is the most frightened thing you've ever seen. If he thinks he's in trouble, he will self-punish. And he is so well behaved, even though I let him on the furniture and things like that. But I figure that's his breed, so it's acceptable. But he cannot do a trick to save his life. He can high five. And he has very good manners. We live in New York now in a high-rise, and so we have responsibilities of what do you do in the elevator, and you sit in the elevator. And so he's well behaved, but he cannot do a trick. And I had to accept that in him. I don't have children, obviously, you can tell, like I'm obsessed with the dog. But I realized, probably as you, most of you here are, I'm sure, are parents or grandparents, that they all have different personalities and they can do certain things. And I realized what my grandfather was able to, when he could tell Ray, the dog, to go get the cows, he knew that Ray could do that, but Floyd was not going to do that. Floyd was better at scaring off the chickens. Whatever it was that needed to be done, he had a job for each of the dogs. And Jasper's job apparently is, well, now he's going to be called the meal ticket.
Yeah. Well, this kind of ties into meal ticket. I wonder, the book about Jasper, but he's been America's dog for how long now?
4 years.
4 years. So have you started a trend at all with Vizslas in the United States? A lot of people coming up to you and saying...
There was a lady that contacted me who said that she picked up her grandson from elementary school, and on her way home, he looked out the window and said, "Grandma, there's a Jasper dog." And I am pleased that the Vizsla owners consider me a bit of an ambassador. I met owners of Vizslas, this couple right there. Yeah. Yes, they've raised Vizslas in their life, and it is true that once you have any sort of breed of dog, you kind of get attached, or you just want any sort of dog. I would rescue 100 dogs if I could. And in fact, there was a little bit of news yesterday. George W. Bush and Laura Bush rescued a dog at the Spca in Dallas. Now, a funny story about that is about 8 months ago, I was at a Barbara Bush Celebration of Reading event in Dallas. And a woman named Jan Reese Jones, she is a supporter of the Bushes, and she was there at the library event, and she runs the shelter. And the president said to her, "Jan, I want to come, and I want to see what you've done there, and I'm going to see if I can get over there pretty soon, and we'll take some pictures and try to do some publicity for your shelter." And I looked at him and I said, "You're going to trick Mrs. Bush into getting a dog, aren't you?" Because the president can't really go to a shelter and not come home with a dog.
Yeah.
So they did bring home a new rescue puppy, and his name is Freddie.
Yeah, that's a great story. In your book, I thought this was particularly interesting. You talk about the challenges of potty training a pup, I think roughly like 46 floors up somewhere. But tell us about that.
Yeah, there's a whole thing in here about the potty training. We call it the protest pee. So one of the reasons I didn't want to get another dog was because, let's see, we moved to New York in November of 2011, right after the 5 became a permanent show. You know that show was supposed to last for 6 weeks, temporary? And we are in our 6th year.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah. And I knew when we were moving up there that Henry was 13 and a half, his health wasn't great, and I told Peter, this move is going to kill him because it's going to be too stressful. He has this whole environment here. He knows where his toys are and his bed and everything. And again, I'm thinking my grandfather, you have dominion over these animals, so you have to make sure they're comfortable. So Peter says, leave the move to me. I'll make sure. And Peter did take Henry 3 times a day. Anytime he needed to go down, take him downstairs. But imagine you're 13 and a half years old as a dog, so I can't do the math by 7. I went to public school in Denver. That's a lot of years. He starts going downhill. And there was a guy named Eddie, and Eddie had an ice cream truck. And so when Peter would go down, take Henry down, Eddie would say, "Hey, Henry, you want your cone?" So he always got a cone every day from Eddie. Because when you're 13 and a half, you might as well. Yeah. Eat ice cream as much as you want. He loved ice cream. So he passed away. And it was, I write about that. It's page 53 for those of you who need a warning and pick up the Kleenex. But for those of you who have had animals, we all go through it. And then you think, I could never do it again. But it was Greta Van Susteren who called me that night around 10 p.m. She'd heard the news, and she said, "I know this is the last thing that you want to do, but I think the best thing for you and Peter is to get a puppy right away." And I said, "Greta, there's so many reasons I can't. I just started this new job. We live in an apartment on 46 floors up. There's not a blade of grass that I can see for blocks around, and it's just going to be too hard for us right now to have a puppy. But we're not going to live in New York for long." And 6 years later. And Peter works from home. And there was one day, soon after that, maybe 2 days later, I was home with him in the afternoon, and the apartment is silent. And I get to go to the studio, and I get my hair and makeup done, and I get to hang out with Kimberly, and we like joke about things, and then Gutfeld's on the show, and there's Juan, and there's Eric, we're having a great time, and I come home and it's silent. And I realize like the companionship and the love was worth more than any sort of trouble it was going to take to potty train a dog in an apartment. But the thing for Jasper was, we had Peter counted, it was 46 yards from our door to the elevator. Then you had to get downstairs, and that wasn't a straight shot because you have to stop 20 times on the way down. Then you got to get through the lobby, out to the street, and then he can go to the bathroom. The other thing about Jasper was so frustrating. He would not use any of those puppy pads. I could put him down, and he would walk right around it. Well, then he found out that he got in trouble every time he would go in the hallway because he would not be able to hold it, and then he wouldn't go in the hallway. So he would just sit in the house like this and like not go anywhere. So then we had to carry him. And then he got to be like, I don't know, 40 pounds, and I'm trying to carry this dog, and he's about half my size, but he finally got it. And then we moved up closer to Central Park, and well, I don't know if I want to give this information away too widely, but you're here in California. So don't tell your New York neighbors, but Central Park is leash-free from 6 to 9 a.m. The whole park. So the best part of my day, the best part of our lives in New York is the dog park. That's where we've met all of our friends. I have rules in the book about dog parks, like no politics at the dog park. Also, no sitting down in the dog park. As soon as Jasper sits down, I'm like, okay, it's time to go. And they're like, okay, no, I'm going to go, I'll play. Because he knows that he can't sit down.
A couple of political questions for you, and then what I'd like to do is turn it over to you in the audience. We'll have you ask questions, and we'll try to get in as many as we can.
I can answer quick. I'm the press secretary. I will not say no comment.
Okay, so we're about a week past the election, and I just wondered if you were...
Exactly a week.
Yeah,
right?
Were you surprised at the outcome?
Yes, of course. Yeah. I mean, there are many people that were Trump supporters early on who said, I always knew he was going to win. And that's fair, because I understand gut instincts. I always felt that about George W. Bush. In fact, I went to bed on election night in 2000 so happy, and I woke up, my husband said, Dana, I'm so sorry. I'm like, why? He won. I was like, oh, yeah. There was a development later on, and he didn't win, and Gore pulled back his concession, and then we had 36 days in Florida. In 2012, there was a belief amongst conservatives, and especially it was really a big push at Fox, I thought, that the polls were wrong and that Romney was obviously going to win, because how could Barack Obama ever get reelected? And obviously Romney was going to win because they were oversampling Democrats in the polls. And it was Bob Beckel who pulled me aside on the Friday night before Election Day in 2012 and said, Dana, I just want to tell you, Romney is not going to win. The polls are not wrong. And I was so mad at him. And I went home, and the truth is, when he said that to me, in my gut, I knew he was right. But in my heart, in my head, I wanted to believe that he was wrong. And on election night, it got called pretty early. Not like this one. It got called early, about 11. And I was sitting next to Bob Beckel, and we were getting ready to go on. We were paired together that night. And I looked at him, and I said, Bob, this is so embarrassing. We just kept losing state after state, race after race. And he said, in a very sweet way, well, kid, it's not 1984 embarrassing. You know, he managed the Mondale campaign. And so he knew about embarrassing losses. And I felt so sick. And part of it was that I felt that I had let the viewers down, because I had let my heart get in front of my head. So the data was there. Obama ends up winning by even more than was projected to, and Romney underperformed, and so we had that result. And I swore to myself, I will never do that again. Fast forward this election. The polls are all showing that Hillary Clinton has a lead. And actually, in the national poll, she did have the lead. The state polls are wrong. and the gut instincts of the Trump supporters all across the country, and I was in Michigan last night, in Southwest Michigan, they knew it. They believed it. They turned out in huge numbers. Do you know that Donald Trump beat Obama's number in Ohio by 7 points? He absolutely, much like Reagan, got Reagan Democrats, and they've gone away. Trump brings them back in a huge way. And the other thing that happened is that Hillary Clinton underperformed her numbers in every group. I don't have the slide to show you, but with millennials, African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, they absolutely underperformed. And if you read some of the postmortems now, you hear that Bill Clinton was agitating, saying, you are forgetting the white working class voters. Remember, he's on the campaign trail and he said, they're rednecks just like me. And still, to this day, people cannot believe the hillbilly from Arkansas won the presidency. But he was one of the smartest politicians that we've seen in our lifetime. And they should have listened to him because Donald Trump absolutely smoked her. So yeah, so that night, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. It was 3 o'clock in the morning and we're still on air. And we couldn't leave the set because they kept coming back to us and we were live and I had drank 2 bottles of water. I was dying. And finally at about 3:24, I turned to the stage manager and I said, could I get a minute to go to the ladies' room? And he said, there's only 6 minutes left in the show and then they're going to cut you all. I was like, I don't think I can make it 6 minutes. It was a wild night, and I'm excited for the policy that's to come because the unsung heroes of this election really, aside from the people that worked on the Trump campaign that deserve all the credit, the National Republican Senatorial Committee, they were smart very early on. They fended off challengers that would have not been able to win their states. They spent money early in those states. They invested in early voting, which I think absolutely helped us keep the United States Senate, and we kept the House at a smaller margin, but still. This is a remarkable opportunity, so I am so excited to see what happens policy-wise.
Great. Okay, I ask, if you have a question, if you raise your hand, we won't get to everyone, I'm positive of that. But what I'd like you to do is when the microphone is placed in your hand, make sure you get the mic in your hand before you ask the question. And we'll start right here.
Good evening.
Hi.
Wonderful presentation. So far, Donald Trump has appointed 2 people to important positions. I wonder if you would discuss something about each of them from what you know.
Okay, so I think you're talking about the White House Chief of Staff and White House Chief Strategist. Exactly. Okay, so those were announced, I think 3 days ago, and that will be Reince Priebus, who had been very instrumental in setting up the Wisconsin Republican Party to be what it is today. And you know, Scott Walker, the governor there, was able to withstand 2 statewide recounts and actually get some real good work done there, and Trump wins the state. So, and then he's at the Republican National Committee, and I think Trump trusts him to manage the White House. But he also is very fond of Steve Bannon, who was a naval officer years and years ago, and then had worked at Goldman Sachs at one point, and invested, I believe, in Seinfeld in the reruns. I don't know how, I have no money, I don't know what that means. But can you imagine how the foresight? My sister still watches Seinfeld reruns. You do too?
Yeah.
So he's set up as chief strategist in the White House. He's a controversial figure. He had been running Breitbart News, having been a target of Breitbart News at one point. I can tell you it's not pleasant. I saw Kellyanne Conway, the campaign manager, say today that Steve Bannon is not as scary as you hear. He might be scary, but maybe not as scary as we hear. And I think that everyone's just going to have to give him a chance. because these are the choices that the president has made. I do wonder about the setup in the White House, and I think that what we don't know is that behind the scenes on the campaign, that Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon worked very well together. Obviously, they had to have in order to secure the win that they did. And now the next step is for the transition to move forward. There's a little bit of rockiness at the moment. You know, Chris Christie had been working on the transition since July. It's a huge job because you have to fill 4,000 appointments, not all at once. But there's some key jobs that have to be filled. There are about 20 national security positions that should never be left vacant. But Christie now has been demoted. Mike Rogers, who was in charge of intel and sort of national security transition making, now he's been removed. So Mike Pence is coming in, but he's not signed the paperwork yet, and they're a little bit behind. They can catch up, and there's plenty of people that are willing to serve. But the other thing you have to think of in terms of those national security posts is that it takes about 8 weeks to do a thorough background check for a top secret clearance. So if you work backwards, you have 8 weeks to get that done. That means that pretty soon you got to start making some of those very key appointments. Now, just in comparison, Barack Obama's first national security appointment was not until November 28th of that year. So I think they've got some time, but just not a lot of it.
Okay. Right over here.
Hello, Dana.
Hi.
I'm a new member of the basket of deplorables.
Welcome.
Yeah.
It's a big basket.
This is on a lighter note. I'd like a little background on one of your more interesting happenings as press secretary, and that's when you suffered some collateral damage when an Iraqi threw shoes at President Bush. I understand that you got in the action yourself. Can you give us a little background?
Sure. You're talking about the Black Eye of Baghdad. I actually opened up my first book with that story because everybody remembers the shoes being thrown at the president because it was on tape. What you didn't know is that the person that screams in the background, that was me, because the Secret Service agent, who was about 6'5", he lunged forward to protect the president, and that hit this boom mic that the interpreter was using, and it swung around and it caught me right here and nearly broke this bone. Is it the occipital bone? Something like that? I don't know, some bone. And it hurt so bad. And it was so chaotic at the time. And I thought, did that guy just throw shoes at the president? And thankfully, he ducked twice. I said, imagine if he hadn't. But he did, thankfully. And the president was so bemused. And he also was not going to let a terrorist stop him from having a press conference. So he insists on staying. Now, I'm here with this lump growing, and it hurts so bad. And a Marine had seen me. And meanwhile, the Secret Service is watching the Iraqi intelligence guys beat the crap out of the terrorists. And he's screaming worse than I did. And this Marine, I want to find this guy so badly because he reached over for me, and he was just huge, and he grabbed me by the hand, and he pulls me up and out. But the Iraqi security services had closed off the room, because now it's a crime scene, right? And of course, I have to tell you that the first thing that went through my mind was that this was a setup for a second bomb. For a bomb. Because that's what they try to do, right? Create chaos, and then as everybody's focused over here, set something off. And there was a ton of equipment, all the live satellite feeds and things like that, where you could hide something. Of course, that didn't happen, thankfully. And they take me to the doors to get out, and this Iraqi security guard says, no leaving. And I said, I need a doctor. And he says, oh, I am doctor. Because a lot of Iraqis, during the war, and because the economy was what it was, they could maybe not make money as a doctor, but if you could get a job in the government in security, then you could be a part of that. He says, I am doctor. I said, oh, my doctor. And I saw through the window, the White House doctor, Dr. Richard Tubb, was out there. And so he sees me, he pulls me out, he gives me this bag of ice, and I put it on my face, and I was like, what is in here? And I look, and it's labeled diarrhea. And I said, Tub, what was in this bag before you put it on my face? And he said, oh, no, it's the medicine, in case you got diarrhea. I'm like, okay. So I'm sitting there, and he says, I don't think it's broken, but, let's just take it easy. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, my gosh, I have to do the president's makeup because he's doing an interview with Martha Raddatz. And it's going to be the first time he's talking about the fact that a two-bit terrorist threw shoes at him at a press conference in Iraq on his last trip. And so one of my favorite pictures is he came in and put his arm around me and he said, I saw you crying, but I thought you were crying just because the guy threw a shoe at me. And I said, Mr. President, you know I love you, but I'm a little tougher than that. We're then to fly to Kabul. Now, I had no idea anything. Did anybody here play hockey? So do you know that you're not supposed to lie down on your side if you get hit in the face, or like in the eye? I didn't know that. I found a little spot on the floor of Air Force One, got a blanket, and laid down because I was just like, I was weary, I was tired. I have a couple hours sleep, and I smell the coffee because we're about to land in Kabul. And so I get up and I fold my blanket and I put it away in the cabinet, and I walked into the conference room where all the guys were sitting, and Mark Thiessen, who was a speechwriter and a big hockey player, goes, oh! And I said, what? And he said, did you lie on your side? I'm like, of course, yes. He goes, all the blood rushed, and now you have a big black eye. From here to here for the last 6 weeks of the administration. Could there be a worse metaphor? But my favorite thing was when we got to Kabul's, to the castle there, Karzai was to meet us. And the president said, here, walk with me. So I'm walking with the president, and Karzai had heard about this, and he was so concerned. He could be charming even though he was corrupt as hell. And he says, oh, Dana, let me give you some tea. And I said, no, sir, I'm fine. And really, you should see the other guy. And he laughed, and I finished out with a big black eye. I didn't even try to cover it with makeup. It wasn't worth it. But a great story in the end.
Very good, very good. I know way back here, and then...
Hi, Dana, big fan.
Thank you.
Why did you choose the name Jasper?
So Jasper, I thought it was a British name. Turns out it's really not. It goes back farther than that even. It's an ancient name. Henry was named after King Henry VIII, but we had a friend in Scotland who, let's just say, he would look at this glass and he'd say, wow, look at the size of that, Jasper. And it was just sort of a funny name, and I thought it was, I didn't know that it would fit the dog because I named him before I ever met him. But to me, Jasper is sort of the perfect mischievous name that's sort of like he is. So that's how he ended up that way. It turns out that there's this show, Twilight, that all the kids watch, and there's a kid on there named, one of the actors in the show, his name is Jasper. And people think he's named after that, but he's not.
Back over here.
Hi, Dana. My name's Thelma, and Lisa's my daughter, and we love the Five.
Great.
So please say hello. Anyway.
I heard there's a rumor that I'm leaving the Five.
No.
No, there is a rumor. That's not true.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Thank goodness. We love you. Anyway, serious question. What do you think, if anything, Donald Trump will or will not do with Hillary Clinton's situation, email, and all of that?
It's a great question. I mean, they spent many a rally chanting, lock her up, for it to turn out to be that he doesn't do anything. But also, what can he do, really? I don't know what will happen. I did talk to somebody on Capitol Hill who believes that the committees should, and the FBI, because of all of this shenanigans and all the things that have happened, should turn it over to a special prosecutor and let that person decide and get it out of the partisanship. And I think that's probably the right thing to do. And on 60 Minutes the other night, Donald Trump said he doesn't want to hurt them. And I thought that was a magnanimous thing, but it does seem a little strange after several months of chanting, lock her up.
Over here.
Hi, Dana. My
Hi.
brother introduced me to the 5 in Ticonderoga, New York, and I finally found it on my TV cable.
Oh, good.
So my name is Nancy. I do not do Facebook, but your husband had an interesting encounter with the New York police, yes?
So she's bringing up a story that my husband is British. He writes one of the sidebar stories in here about a time in Washington, D.C. that I actually gave the excerpt to a website called Daily Signal, and that is out of the Heritage Foundation. It's really about the over-criminalization of America. I mean, that is happening everywhere, but this story is just hilarious. I'll give you the short version is, in Washington, D.C. with Henry on Capitol Hill at Lincoln Park, dog owners used to gather, and there was sort of an understanding that it was off-leash dog park, but it was unofficial. And one day, a National Park Service policeman comes roaring up, and everybody reaches for their leashes to put on their dog so they don't get a ticket, and Peter says, oh, he forgot the leash in the car. Now, Henry always walked a heel. We didn't even need a leash for him. But the Park Service policeman gave Peter a ticket. It was a $25 ticket. Fine. Pay that, move on. The problem is, on the back of the ticket, the address was wrong. So the check gets returned to us. I say, well, I don't know, maybe make it out to the Park Service. He sends it to the Park Service headquarters. They say, we can't accept this check because it's made out to us, which didn't really make sense. Okay, fine. I said, well, Peter, you need to figure this out. And he, who was a newly minted US citizen, says, oh, no, I will have my day in court, and I will tell them. I will tell them how ridiculous this is, okay, in the British accent, so it sounds sort of colonial. Like, okay. And then one night, I get home from the White House, about 10 o'clock, and I see this note from the DC government called Operation Clean Slate. So I open it up, and it's an opportunity for Peter to come in and surrender himself. And I called him. He was in Egypt. I didn't even care. It was 2 o'clock in the morning there. And I said, I told you this was going to happen, and blah, 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 blah. He said, no, I'm glad. I'm going to have my day in court. Well, the day in court came with an entire day in several different jail cells in Washington, D.C., including, at one point, leg shackles. And bologna sandwiches and lemonade. And we did an audio book for this. I actually read this one, and I had him come in to do the other part. And because the British accent is so good, if you want the audio version, it's pretty good. But if you go on Facebook to my page, you can scroll down and see we did a Facebook Live with the Daily Signal, and Peter is there, and he explains it all, and Jasper sits through the whole thing. Actually, he slept a little bit, too.
Great. Back here.
Hi, Dana. I wanted to bring up the Benghazi event. If President-elect Trump decides to not go forward with anything against Hillary Clinton, I can understand all that, but I'm just sort of concerned how that will be reconciled with Pat, the mother of one of the victims of Benghazi, because she has been wanting to get answers about what happened to her son. So that's the only thing that is sort of outstanding, and just wondering what your thoughts are about that.
That's a great question that I hadn't really thought of. An interesting thing about the whole email server deal is that, do you know the only reason we know about the email server that Hillary Clinton set up is because Trey Gowdy, the congressman, had an investigation about Benghazi, and his staff, in a very detailed way, went through all the documents and says, wait, what is this? And it was about the private email server. So that's how you end up even knowing about that, and that unravels her ability to have some shred of credibility, and that's why her numbers on dishonesty were so high. Now, Donald Trump's were high too, but still, the Benghazi story leads to the email server, which leads to the loss, I think, of the presidency. I don't know what they'll do. I don't know what can be done on that. I feel like she testified, and I don't know if there's anything more that they can do. I do hope that Pat Smith finds some peace, and we should all pray for her, that because I know she's hurting and misses her son very much, and he was a patriot. And those guys that are contractors, that do very dangerous work for Americans, deserve the full protection that should be afforded to them as is to our military.
Yeah, that's right. Dana, we have time for one last question, which I think
Who's
will
going to
be
get it? Uh-oh, you better make it a good one.
I'll do the best I can. I do have a question for you on polling. The polls, especially after the Access Hollywood piece, had Donald Trump down a good 20 points.
Yep.
The same polls were showing Hillary destroying him. The same polls showed Barack Obama with an approval rating at 54%. With all that being said, it would have been very easy for the American public to stay home because they would have believed anything at that point. They would have been defeated before ever going to the polls. What shifted? What changed? What do we learn from that?
Well, voter turnout overall was down from 2012. A lot of people that either stayed home or they switched their vote at the end. The interesting thing about this election, just covering it, was that Donald Trump's numbers would go up, and then a story would happen like Access Hollywood tape, and then his numbers would go down, and she'd go up. And then Jim Comey would come out and say something more about the emails, and her numbers went down and his went up. So in this election, if you were the candidate, you didn't want the attention to be on you. You wanted the attention to be on the other person because let's say that you're in a battle of the brands, your Pepsi and your Coke. You try to drive each other down because there's nothing more you can do to lift each other up or lift yourself up. So you try to make the other person look worse. And I also think that in the states, the state polling was really bad. Plus, looking at Barack Obama's number at 55% approval rating at this point, at the second term of presidency, that it almost never happens. And from his perspective, the glass is half full, because Obama's thinking, well, unemployment's low, stock market's good, wages are starting to go up. I did an amazing job. There's more people who have health insurance. Like, I am so amazing. And the rest of the country is like, we don't see the glass as half full. We see it as half empty. And so it was a change election. Now, I hope that the Republican Party can unite in a way that broadens out that tent again to include the voters that had voted for Obama that decided to vote for Trump this time around. But they're going to need results. And that's why I think, regardless of the polling, what now really matters is the legislation. You'll see a lame duck session that's coming up very soon. One of the first things that Donald Trump will have to do is to nominate a Supreme Court justice. Ted Cruz was in New York today at Trump Tower, by the way. I've always wondered about that. I remember about 8 years ago, I read an article in National Review as a cover story about Ted Cruz as Solicitor General in Texas. And I remember the headline said, "The Republicans' Bright New Star." And I was curious, so I read the whole thing, and it was about the Solicitor General work that he did in Texas. And if I were Donald Trump, that would be smart, right? Because you get that guy out of the Congress. You'll never hear from him again. And he would be a good Supreme Court justice. So I don't know if I actually have no idea why Ted Cruz was in New York, but I'm on the 5 now, I can speculate.
Yeah. Well, I just, on behalf of the audience, everyone here, Dana, I just want to say what a pleasure it's been to have you here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.